VLPSos here. This is a video lesson for Python programming methods. I recommend pausing on occasion to practice. A method is a function within a class that takes, uses, or works on an instance of that class. Unlike regular functions where you have to pass all variables to the function inside of its parentheses or argument parameters, a method automatically receives the instance it works on and assigns it to the first variable given in its declaration or definition. This first variable must be there, and it can be called anything, but it is most often called self. Other variables may be included in the declaration if the programmer wishes. We've started a class and then have included the init special method that helps create instances of this class. The class is called thing. The init function is the special method. It takes self, which is the representation of it's the variable that will represent the instance when this special method is called. We also need to send a number and a color, which will become the values for the attributes number and color. Thing also has two other attributes, a Boolean active and an integer points. We're going to write a method for thing, and the method will be defined inside of thing, and we'll call this new method do something. In do something's declaration, in the definition line, self was included inside the parentheses. Again, self is necessary because this being a method of a class will always be working on an instance of the class, and the instance will be the value of self as this method works and uses and references that instance self. This do something function will look at the points attribute of the instance, and on condition that points is less than 50, it will print this. Else, if the points attribute is less than or equal to 100, then we'll print that. This is a very generic method. Else, this would be the case that the points were greater than 100, print the other. This is a method within our class. This method only works on the instance. There are no other variables that are contributing to the functionality that this code block uses or accomplishes. We do reference the points attribute of the instance that this method is working on. We're going to write another method. So we'll define it like a function inside the class. And in this case, the name is change something. It requires an instance to work on that we'll call self, and another variable, amount. So when we call the change something method on the instance, we'll also need to supply it another value that will take on the variable amount will be assigned to. This method will take the points attribute and it will reassign it and add the amount. This is a very simplistic thing to do. We don't need a method to accomplish something like this, but this is an example of a method written to work on an instance that also requires another variable and will change the value of an attribute. Our third and final example of a method is going to be defined inside the class and called interact with another. We have the self that is required by methods, and then we're going to include another variable that must be passed with the expectation that other will be a second instance. So self and other are going to each stand for an instance of thing. Self is the one that's required. Other is another that needs to come through the argument parameters or be put in the parentheses when we use this function. And in this example, it's going to compare the points attribute of the first instance, self, with the points attribute of the second instance, other. And if self's points are greater than other points, then the points attribute of self will increase by 5. And a message string will be assigned something happened. Else, no changes other than the message string is assigned nothing happened. And then it will return the message. So this is an example of a method that will take two instances but also return something. We can save and run, and of course we haven't created instances of thing, and we do not call the functions. We've simply defined everything and we're ready to go. And before we create instances and use the methods, let's make a note. A function with double underscores is a special method, which are different because they are called not by name, but in special circumstances. The special method that we have in this class is the typical one, the init method, and it's special because it's used when instances are created. We never call the init function by name directly. Continuing with the notes, inside the code block of a method, the attributes of the instance are referenced as self.attribute. Outside of the method, there needs to be a way to distinguish the instances from each other. So we'll provide an example by referring to attributes inside a method and outside the method. Inside the method, we use self, and then a dot, and then the name of the attribute in order to reference the attribute. Outside, it's a little bit different. We need to make some instances of thing to practice with. I'm going to create a dictionary called collection and assign to the dictionary of collection a new element that will have a key of 1 and is equal to a call to the class thing. And when I call the class, or I make an instance, I need to supply 2 values because the init special method requires 2. Notice that self is not passed in the argument because self is done automatically. I'm going to create another collection or another instance that will be stored in the dictionary called collection with the unique key 2, and we'll call it, or we'll give it the values or send the values 2 and white. Saving and running, checking for errors. We still don't have any output. We have a class, we've made instances, but we haven't done anything with them yet. I'm going to make a note, make a couple of things, use a dictionary to manage them. That's what we've done. And referencing an attribute outside of the method looks like this. I'm going to make a print, and I want to print a string, which will be the color, and an integer, which will be the number of the thing. And I supply the value of the string and the integer by referencing the attribute. The first one will come from the dictionary. The first instance that we're going to use this print line on will come from the dictionary called collection. So I need to use the variable of my dictionary, followed by not an index, but the key that's in that dictionary, which now refers to the instance in the dictionary with key 1. And then to reference the attribute of that instance, I type dot and then the attribute color, which will then be the string that supplies that symbol when we print. Again, I want to reference the number attribute. I do that by first naming the dictionary the instance is in, followed by square brackets, the key of that particular instance, and then outside the brackets a dot and the name of the attribute, in this case number. This print line is going to be copied, and to do the same thing to a different instance, all I need to do is change the keys. And it'll work on a different instance. The first line will work on instance with key 1, second with key 2. I now expect something to be printed in idle, and when I ran my program, I can get the line red thing 1 and white thing 2, where red and 1 and white and 2 were the values of attributes of those things. Continuing on, we can use a for loop to iterate through the dictionary to process the instances. So we haven't used any methods yet. But this previously written code will use the methods that we wrote. We have a variable set to rounds, and we iterate by using a for loop through the range from 0 to the number of rounds. I can easily change how much iteration I do simply by changing the value of rounds. Every time we iterate, we go to another for loop, and in this case, we're iterating through our collection. We only have 2 in our collection, so we expect the value of key to take on just the key values in collection 1 and 2. And what we do is we look inside the collection with the current key value and append or do the do something method to that instance. Again, collection with key in the square brackets represents an instance. It represents a thing object. So if we put a dot and then a method, a call to a method, we're going to use the method do something on the instance that it's working on. So if the value of key, the first time we iterate, is 1, then we are going to the do something method, and specifically now self is the instance with key 1 that came from the dictionary. That's the one that will be checking the points and printing something dependent on the value. Afterwards, we get a random number. We are working with the same instance that we did before, and we run the change something method on that instance and send the value points to the change something. The change something method will add those points to the points attribute of that instance. We then, with the same instance, check its number attribute. If it's equal to 1, then we assign other to be in the dictionary another instance with the key value that is not 1 but 2. In other words, this here will, depending on the instance that we're working on, will assign other to be the other instance, which means that we can then call the interact with other method and have both instances be sent to the other method. If we're working with a key value of 1, then the interact with other method will consider self to be the one that has a key value of 1, and other to be the instance with a key value of 2. When we're iterating, when key is equal to 2, then 2 will be the instance that this method considers self, and 1 will be the instance that is considered other. And then the report gets the value that is returned by the interact with other method, which then gets printed. Difficult to say. It may be easier to reason it out by looking at the code yourself. Let's see what happens when we run a program. We needed to import random at the top if we're going to use it. Trying again. We can see evidence of our methods being called. We have some this, that's, and others being printed, and something happened and nothing happened, which is all prints that are coming from the calls to the methods. And finally, let's look at the attributes after some processing has been done to modify them. So the evidence in idle that we have right now is the printouts, the print statements that were reached when we called those methods. But what we have yet to see is how the attributes of our things changed. So if we add these 2 lines of code, then we're going to be printing out the name and the color and the number and the points of our things. So we will be able to observe especially how points have changed. Running our program, we have the stuff happen, and then we can see that the point values totaled up in a somewhat random way. If we ran again, we can see that the point values totaled differently because of a random factor. Now you have seen how to write methods for a class and use them to manage and manipulate instances of that class. Write your own simple class and make at least 2 instances of it. Write at least 1 method that takes 2 instances, like the one above that takes self and other, and somehow changes the value of an attribute. Have fun.